Welcome to another episode of DisruptED TV. My name is Michael Falgaris. I'm excited to be hosting today's show where we'll have a conversation with New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith. Chris Smith is currently serving his 20th term as the U.S. Representative for New Jersey's 4th Congressional District, having served since 1981. The district includes portions of Mercer, Monmouth, and Ocean counties. He's a member of the Republican Party. Welcome, Congressman Chris Smith, to DisruptED TV.
Michael, thank you.
How are you? Welcome.
Good to be on. Thank you.
We're here in Belmar. I hear you're kind of fond of Belmar. You met your wife, or you proposed to her on a jetty.
Yes.
Let's
I've
see.
been coming here since I was born.
Really?
My grandmother had a trailer in Brown's Trailer Village, and we spent 2 weeks at least every year here, and learned how to water ski, a 16-foot boat in Shark River. So it's always been a great second home for my wife and I.
Nice. Now, in preparation for today's interview, I was learning a little bit more about your record and all the things that you've been doing over your time in U.S. Congress, and a lot of them had to do with like protecting people with your trafficking laws and things like that. Can you just tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. It all really comes out of my faith, and my wife and I, we talk about it often, how important it is to help the weakest and most vulnerable. It starts with the unborn child and continues with those with disabilities, particularly severe disabilities. I've written a number of laws on autism, including Autism Cares, which is the current law that we're under right now, providing money for NIH, for research, also for the Centers for Disease Control. And it's really taken us, I think, many, many steps forward in terms of trying to assist those and their caregivers, especially their parents, with those problems. And on trafficking, in 1995, I began looking into this issue of human trafficking. In 1997, introduced the first bill. It became law in the year 2000 and is a comprehensive whole-of-government approach to prevent, to prosecute the traffickers, and to protect the victims, which disproportionately, particularly in sex trafficking, are women and children.
It sounds like the majority of your career, and then recently you just had a bill passed in January that deals with trafficking and being able to bring curriculum or education into the schools. That's very interesting.
Well, this one, and I named it after Frederick Douglass, the great anti-slave advocate, an abolitionist who made all the difference in the world, was born a slave. It's his 200th anniversary of his birth in 2018. So I named it after him, fitting. Matter of fact, his great-great-grandson was at my first press conference, We Become Friends,
Wow.
who said his great-great-grandfather would be involved in this modern-day slavery were he alive today. This is the manifestation of that cruelty. One of the provisions, the first provision of that bill, it provides $430 million, authorizes a number of programs, including International Megan's Law, which I wrote a few years ago, on child sex trafficking. But long story short, it seeks to put together a model curriculum so that all of our elementary and secondary schools across the country will have a best practices on the prevention side. And if someone knows of, who do they contact? Where do they make that, if you suspect something, almost like terrorism, see something, say something.
Right.
And many of our young women are being trafficked. They're very quickly gotten onto drugs, so the controlling, the pimp, or whoever he or she may be, are able to manipulate them even more because of the dependency. And many have escaped it, gotten help. Far too many have not. And this legislation takes us further down that road of prevention, prosecution, and protection.
It teaches them what to be aware of.
Situational awareness,
Yeah.
exactly.
And then now, is this mandated that everyone has to cover it in their curriculum?
It's come up with a model curriculum, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Education, and I'm planning on meeting with the Secretary very, very shortly. I have the request in, so that there's no delay in implementation, so hopefully no later than this coming September.
DisruptED TV is a partner with the American Center for School Safety. What is the U.S. Congress doing for school safety, and how do you see it in terms of the schools in New Jersey?
Excellent question, Michael. We've been working, and our last Labor, Health, and Human Services bill provided several hundreds of millions of dollars in the whole area of school safety, and very seriously is saying, let's take all the best practices about access to the school, whether or not there should be, and there should be, a police presence of some kind that is competent and knows how to handle a crisis, to ensure that there's a plan. Should something happen, what did the teachers, what did the students do? You know, I was a kid, I remember in the 60s, it sounds a little crazy, but we used to go under our desk for bomb shelters, you know. I mean, that's how we felt about the Soviets, that there was going to be I still remember it at St. Cecilia's in Island. We'd be under our desk. That's not going to stop much. But that said, the idea of training children to be situationally aware, students I should say, is all important. As I mentioned, some of the students asked me the question, a similar one. Social media sometimes is a dead giveaway when somebody is sending out signs that he or she might do something horrific. See something, say something. Get it to a competent authority, a teacher, the police officer at the school, whoever it might be, and say, maybe there's nothing here, but maybe there is. Please check this out. And I think that kind of eyes and ears could make a huge difference. But we are putting more and more money into that effort. We also are putting money, or policy, more than money, into maybe shoring up some of our gun laws. I mean, I do believe in the right of people to own a gun, but there are a group of people who should never have access to a firearm. And I think we need to tighten our laws when it comes to that as well. Again, it's all about out of abundance of caution. How do you mitigate threat? You can't do it absolute, but you can do it by doing a series of important overlapping steps. And the schools have responded, I think, magnificently across the country to try to lessen the threat.
It seems that even though all these school shootings have been detrimental and they've harmed a lot of people, we seem to be learning different things about what has gone on and maybe what has happened prior, so that we can be aware, learn, educate, and maybe prevent in the future.
Absolutely, and I think, every one of those are tragedies beyond words. We all remember Columbine and how we were shocked, and the talk of never again, and never again has quickly yielded to again. Yeah. So I think we can't be too vigilant. Of course, we need to respect the civil liberties of our students and schools, but there's a good balance there of good proactive efforts that could make a difference.
So school choice, school funding, things like that, where do you stand and what's being done in Congress now?
Well, I do believe strongly in tuition tax credits. I do think the idea of school choice in the macro does make planning from year over year extremely difficult. I mean, some of the school choice is to pick the public school of your choice, some is to pick private or parochial. It's not clear where all of that goes from year to year. I do think that tuition tax credits, sufficient credit to make a difference, will empower many of our parents who are struggling, particularly middle-income parents who just don't have the wherewithal to have their child go where they want them to go. So I do think a tax credit, and make it refundable so that people in the lower echelon of the economic ladder can make sure that they get the funding as well, because they may not make enough to access the credit in the first place. So I think it's an idea whose time has come.
Prior to doing this, I was an autistic teacher, special ed degree, and I'm kind of excited to learn all the things you've been doing for Autism Cares. In terms of the education of those students and beyond education, what did your bills encompass in terms of that education and taking care of those students after they graduate?
Another great question. The latest bill called Autism Cares, which was signed into law, and I was the author of it, provides $1.3 billion for research at NIH, CDC, and for HRSA, which is the Health and Human Services. They do services and things of that kind. We put in a whole section to do an analysis of what is out there, inventory-wise, in the entire government. And I also did a GAO study on that as well, General Accountability Office, as a check and a balance, to find out what is out there. What are we doing for continuing education? It seems to me that chronological age is a non-starter when it comes to an autistic person, including somebody on the spectrum. When it stops by law, there is a deterioration of that individual, and it starts almost immediately. I started on the autism laws in my first term, 1981, but kind of like a lot of people said, the experts said we got it covered. In 97, a husband and wife from Brick Township, Bobby and Billy Gallagher, came into my Whiting office. We spent 3 hours talking about what they thought was a prevalence spike in Brick. And I read all their materials. It was very, very voluminous. They did a great job. And I said, we need a new law. So I wrote a law, introduced it. 3 years later, it became an amendment to Title I of the Children's Health Act. But one of the things it did was to say to CDC, which was spending a paltry $287,000 per year, which doesn't even buy a desk. I even said to them, why even spend anything when you have such an inadequate amount of money? Well, that now has skyrocketed as a result of the law, and necessarily so. Now we know prevalence studies, and they come out every couple of years as to what the numbers are, and the numbers are staggering, especially here in New Jersey. So numbers do drive policy, and the hope is that, the need for the 50,000 young people who matriculate into adulthood every year who are on the autism spectrum, they need special help. And they're not necessarily getting it. It's a very spotty. New Jersey is advanced compared to some other states, but we need to do more as well. Police training. The sheriff in Monmouth County, Sheriff Golden, trains his officers. He has this great guy who's got a child who's got autism, and I've met him many times, just a wonderful guy, and he trains him how to handle an autistic child who may have to be pulled over or arrested.
So important.
It's so important because you can get a react, particularly from a severely autistic child, and then that leads to a react. Well, if you've got a well-trained police officer, it makes all the difference. Housing, a lot of the people who are increasingly gray and the parents, they said, what's going to happen to my darling son and daughter when I pass? So we need to be building up capacity in our society to deal with these 50,000 per year who are becoming adults. Job opportunities. I had a series of hearings. One was with SAP, the software company, and they talked about how some of the parents of autistic children who work for them wanted to hire some kids, some of their own kids. And what they found very quickly was these kids are assets. Particularly those on the spectrum with a focus that is like a laser beam. It's a good business decision, plus it started out as a humanitarian gesture that quickly became, wow, this is good. So I think we need to be looking for those opportunities on the employment side because they want to work. I've learned that with the whole disability community. Just give them an opportunity, and these young people will soar.
That's great. We're doing so many outstanding things in the classroom, and then they turn 21, and we want to be able to keep going.
Makes no sense. It ought to be lifelong. Because they'll grow, they'll get stronger intellectually in every other way, and even with the Gallaghers, the ones I mentioned, Bobby and Billy Gallagher, they have 2 children with autism severely. They found as soon as the school ended, they turned 21, they started deteriorating. So it all started with the Gallaghers. When they walked in that office and said, we have a prevalence spike, CDC didn't believe it. We had a review of literature at Brick High School. I'll never forget it. We had all these good people from the Centers for Disease Control, all of these interested parents of autistic children who are very well versed. And they were saying, well, what about the study from Tokyo? What about the study? And by the 4th time, 5th time, they said, oh, we don't know that one. I said, Houston, we've got a problem. And I accelerated my bill. I called it the Assure Act, and it became law in the year 2000.
We are shooting this on the day of the State of the Union, and you're heading down there afterwards. You've been doing this for 20 years. What still excites you in the morning when you get up to do your job?
Oh, I find the challenges of this job, the opportunities to make a difference in the life of a person who's particularly vulnerable to whatever, trafficking or someone who's got challenges in the classroom, autistic persons with autism. It's just, this is the kind of job you come up with an idea, 3 years later it could be law. And most of my laws started just like that. Either my wife and I praying together. Sometimes somebody will walk in from an NGO, from an organization and say, hey, would you do this? Almost none of my laws are that. They're ones, like the one with David Goldman. My wife and I were watching television when he was on making an appeal. This is after 4 years of hitting his head against the wall, being told by our government and by the Brazilian government, have a nice day. You're not getting your son back. I watched it, and my wife turned to me and said, you're going to call him, right? I said, he's not even from my district. She goes, call him. So I called him. I was in Brazil the next week with him in Brasilia, in the court, and that began a full court press. And then after it was over, I did a review of everything I had learned, and I learned a lot, and my staff, of what wasn't done by the U.S. Department of State. And I said, again, good people, very committed people. They don't have the law. They don't have the direction to make a difference. I'm a big Seinfeld fan. And one of the episodes had George Costanza with what he called the Penske file. You might even remember it.
Yes.
And he keeps looking at this file. And he goes, I've got the file. He never opens it, never does anything with it. And I said, that's what state does with these files and these parents and these left behind children. They mean well, but there's no action plan. So we wrote an action plan. It's called the Sean and David Goldman International Child Abduction Prevention and Return Act. And at the end of the day, if a country shows a pattern of non-compliance with the principles of the Hague Convention, whether they sign it or not, and that's the international treaty, we're going to sanction you. First, we're going to call you out and put you on a list as egregious violator. And there are countries like Brazil, like Japan that are on that list. India is on that list. And then we're going to sanction you. And that gets their attention. You know, our civil rights laws worked primarily because of sanctioning. Title IX, to get women's sport where it ought to be equal, works because the colleges and universities would say, oh, I can't risk losing that federal funding. What are we doing for women's soccer? What are we doing for women's, and fill in the blank on sports? It made all the difference having a sanctioning sort of Damocles, if you will, hanging over the universities, and in this case, the countries. So it is helping to effectuate the return of kids. It's also, even more importantly, doing more on the prevention side so they're not abducted in the first place. And that all came out of dealing with David Goldman and his son, Sean, who they still live right here in Monmouth County. I see him all the time. Sean's taller than he is now. At the time, he was a little fellow.
It's a great story. It must be exciting to be able to talk for the people that don't have that voice.
That's exactly it.
It seems that's what you're doing, and I can kind of feel the passion from you now. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, to our DisruptED TV viewers. Most of our viewers are educators, leaders in education, and now with school safety and security. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Michael, thank you.
If you could just look into the camera here and just tell people how they could learn more about you, your bills, the things that you've done, or if they want to get in touch with you.
We have a very informative website. It's chrissmith.house.gov. We have on the side laws authored by. We have another one, hearings that I've chaired. And then a lot of other information that I think you'll find of interest. Like on trafficking, we not only have the laws and some of the statements and the hearings, but a lot of other very, very timely and important information about human trafficking that they may find, as well as sources to be contacted and individuals and groups in this war to stop human exploitation through trafficking.
Well, we want to wish you the very best as moving forward. Good luck and safe trips to Washington. Thanks, Chris Smith from the 4th Congressional District in New Jersey. My name is Michael Falgaris from DisruptED TV. You've been watching another episode. Thank you, and take care.